Angel Reese made her home debut with the Atlanta Dream at Gateway Center Arena in a game that drew attention for multiple reasons. Expectations were relatively high given the anticipation around her move and the storyline surrounding her transition from Chicago. However, the performance on the court did not fully match those expectations. Atlanta faced the Washington Mystics, a team that relied heavily on younger players and lacked some of its experienced presence. Despite that, the Dream struggled to maintain consistency throughout the game and ultimately lost by 11 points. Reese's individual performance became a focal point of post-game discussion. She had difficulty converting scoring opportunities around the rim and faced strong defensive resistance, particularly from Kiki Iriafen, who recorded multiple blocks against her. On the other end, rookie Lauren Betts was effective in the paint, finishing with a solid scoring performance and creating matchup challenges. Beyond individual moments, the game also highlighted broader issues for Atlanta, including offensive flow and shot selection. Head coach Carl Smesko noted after the game that the team experienced stretches where the ball movement stalled, leading to inefficient possessions. The atmosphere inside Gateway Center Arena also became part of the conversation. While the venue has a relatively small capacity, the turnout appeared lower than expected for a debut of this significance. This game came shortly after another widely discussed performance in Chicago, where Reese returned to face her former team. That matchup had been framed as a statement opportunity, but her production in limited minutes did not align with the pregame expectations. Taken together, these early performances have sparked conversations about Reese's role, impact, and how she fits within Atlanta's system moving forward. At the same time, it is still a very small sample size, and adjustments, both individually and as a team, are likely as the season progresses. As the discussion around Angel Reese's early performances in Atlanta continues to grow, it's important to step back and look at the broader context rather than focusing only on isolated moments. Two preseason or early season games, no matter how visible, rarely define a player's trajectory, especially one still adjusting to a new system, teammates, and expectations. Reese entered the WNBA with a very specific identity. At the collegiate level, she built her reputation on energy, rebounding dominance, interior presence, and emotional intensity. That identity translated into immediate statistical production, particularly on the glass. However, the transition from college basketball to the professional level has historically required adjustments, especially for players whose games rely heavily on physicality and effort rather than spacing and shot creation. In Atlanta, those adjustments appear to be ongoing. The Dream are not simply inserting Reese into an existing structure, they are also evolving as a team. With players like Ryan Howard and Alicia Gray already established as key contributors, the challenge becomes integrating Reese in a way that complements, rather than disrupts, offensive flow. One of the key issues visible in the Mystics game was spacing. Modern WNBA offenses rely heavily on floor balance, perimeter shooting, and quick decision-making. When the ball sticks, as Coach Carl Smesko noted, it often indicates hesitation or uncertainty within the offensive scheme. That's not solely on one player, it reflects team-wide rhythm and chemistry, which typically takes time to develop. Reese's role within that system is still being defined. In Chicago, she operated in an environment where she had significant freedom to crash the boards and operate near the rim. In Atlanta, she may be asked to do similar things, but within a more structured framework that emphasizes ball movement and efficiency. That transition can create early inconsistencies, particularly in shot selection and positioning. The defensive side of the ball presents another layer of complexity. Facing players like Kiki Iriafen and Lauren Betts is not a simple assignment, especially given their size, skill, and confidence. Betts, in particular, represents a new generation of post players, mobile, skilled, and capable of scoring in multiple ways. For Reese, adjusting to that level of versatility defensively will be an important step in her development. It's also worth noting that preseason and early matchups often exaggerate both strengths and weaknesses. Teams experiment with rotations, players test new roles, and coaches evaluate combinations that may not appear again once the regular season structure is finalized. As a result, performances during this period should be interpreted carefully. The conversation around Reese's offensive efficiency is valid, but it also requires nuance. Shooting percentages, especially in small sample sizes, can fluctuate significantly. A few missed layups or contested attempts can skew numbers quickly. Over time, those metrics tend to stabilize, providing a clearer picture of a player's true effectiveness. Rebounding, however, remains a consistent strength in Reese's game. While critics often point out that some rebounds come off her own missed shots, that observation only tells part of the story. Offensive rebounding, regardless of origin, still creates additional possessions, which can be valuable. The key question is whether those extra possessions translate into points, either through putbacks or kickouts to shooters. For Atlanta, maximizing that aspect of Reese's game could become a strategic advantage. If the Dream can convert second chance opportunities efficiently, Reese's presence on the boards becomes even more impactful. That requires coordination, spacing, and awareness from the entire team. Another dimension to consider is the difference between individual branding and on-court performance. Reese is undeniably one of the more visible young players in the league. Her college career, personality, and social media presence have contributed to a level of recognition that extends beyond traditional basketball metrics. That visibility brings both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, it increases attention, fan engagement, and marketability. On the other, it raises expectations to a level where every performance is scrutinized, often disproportionately. For a player still developing professionally, that environment can amplify both successes and struggles. Comparisons to other players, such as Caitlin Clark, have also shaped the narrative. While comparisons are inevitable, they are not always productive. Clark's game is built around perimeter scoring, playmaking, and spacing, skills that naturally align with the modern offensive structure of many WNBA teams. Reese's strengths, by contrast, are rooted in interior play, rebounding, and physical presence. These are fundamentally different archetypes. Evaluating one through the lens of the other can lead to misleading conclusions. Success in the WNBA does not come from fitting a single mold. It comes from maximizing individual strengths within a team system. The discussion around team success is another area where context matters. Basketball is inherently a team sport, and outcomes like wins and losses depend on multiple variables: roster construction, coaching strategy, injuries, and overall chemistry. Assigning those outcomes primarily to one player oversimplifies a complex dynamic. That said, impact can still be measured in more subtle ways. Defensive rotations, screen setting, off-ball movement, and effort plays often don't appear prominently in box scores but contribute significantly to team performance. For Reese, continuing to refine these areas could enhance her overall value beyond traditional statistics. The early signs in Atlanta suggest a team still searching for consistency. That's not unusual, especially with roster changes and evolving roles. The coaching staff's willingness to experiment with lineups indicates an ongoing process of evaluation rather than a finalized structure. For Reese, this phase represents an opportunity. Adjusting to a new system, improving efficiency, and expanding her skill set are all part of the natural progression for a young player. The ability to respond to early criticism, constructively and with focus, often determines long-term success more than initial performances. Looking ahead, several factors will shape how this situation develops. First, offensive chemistry. As players become more familiar with each other's tendencies, decision-making typically becomes quicker and more effective. Second, defensive cohesion. Understanding rotations and communication can reduce breakdowns and improve overall team defense. Third, role clarity. Defining responsibilities allows players to operate with confidence rather than hesitation. If those elements come together, Atlanta has the potential to stabilize and improve. Reese's contributions, particularly in rebounding and energy, could become more impactful within a cohesive framework. At the same time, the narrative surrounding her will likely remain intense. High-profile players often operate under a microscope, where each game feeds into broader discussions about identity, value, and trajectory. Managing that narrative, both externally and internally, is part of the professional landscape. Ultimately, it is far too early to draw definitive conclusions. 2 games, no matter how widely discussed, do not define a season, let alone a career. What they do provide is a snapshot, a starting point for analysis and adjustment. For Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream, the focus moving forward will be on translating potential into consistent performance. That process rarely happens overnight. It involves refinement, adaptation, and at times, setbacks. The difference between a moment and a trend lies in what happens next. Another layer that often gets overlooked in early evaluations is the mental adjustment that comes with a transition like this. Moving from one franchise to another is not just about learning plays or building on-court chemistry. It also involves adapting to a new environment, new expectations, and a different organizational culture. For a young player like Angel Reese, that adjustment period can directly impact performance, especially in the first few appearances. Confidence plays a significant role in basketball, particularly for players who operate in high-contact areas like the paint. Missed shots around the rim can quickly affect rhythm, and when those misses are followed by defensive challenges on the other end, it can create a cycle that's difficult to break within a single game. That's why evaluating performance over a longer stretch is more reliable than focusing on one or two outings. From a tactical standpoint, one area where Reese can evolve is finishing efficiency. At the professional level, defenders are not only bigger and stronger but also more disciplined in positioning. This means that shots that were relatively uncontested in college become heavily challenged in the WNBA. Improving footwork, touch, and decision-making in those moments can significantly raise her scoring efficiency. There's also the question of offensive versatility. Modern frontcourt players are increasingly expected to contribute beyond traditional post play, whether through mid-range shooting, passing out of double teams, or even stretching the floor. While Reese has shown flashes of these abilities, consistency in those areas could open up more options for Atlanta's offense and reduce predictability. Defensively, growth often comes from repetition and film study. Recognizing tendencies, anticipating moves, and maintaining discipline without fouling are skills that develop over time. Against players like Lauren Betts, who combine size with skill, even small improvements in positioning and timing can make a noticeable difference. The team dynamic is equally important. Chemistry is not built overnight, and early miscommunications are common. A missed rotation, a late pass, or a hesitation in spacing can disrupt an entire possession. As players spend more time together, both in practice and in games, those moments typically become less frequent. It's also worth addressing how narratives form in today's media environment. A single clip, such as a block or a missed shot, can circulate widely and shape public perception, even if it doesn't represent the overall performance. Social media tends to amplify extremes, highlighting either standout plays or visible mistakes while overlooking the quieter aspects of the game. For Reese, whose profile already attracts attention, this effect is even more pronounced. Every sequence is more likely to be analyzed, shared, and debated. That level of visibility can create pressure, but it can also be an opportunity to demonstrate resilience and growth over time. Looking at Atlanta as a whole, the team appears to be in a phase of recalibration. Integrating new pieces while maintaining competitiveness is a challenge that many teams face. It requires patience from both the organization and its supporters, as well as a willingness to adapt strategies based on what works and what doesn't. The coaching staff's comments about lineup experimentation suggest that adjustments are already underway. This doesn't necessarily indicate a lack of confidence in any one player. Rather, it reflects the process of finding the most effective combinations. Rotations often shift in the early part of a season as coaches gather information and refine their approach. Another important factor is leadership. Established players like Ryan Howard and Alicia Gray play a crucial role in setting the tone, both on and off the court. Their ability to guide newer or recently acquired teammates can influence how quickly the group comes together. For Reese, integrating into that leadership structure means understanding when to assert herself and when to operate within the flow of the team. Striking that balance is a key part of development for any young player entering a new situation. The broader conversation about impact also deserves a closer look. Impact is not always immediate or easily measurable. Sometimes it shows up in subtle ways, drawing defensive attention, creating second-chance opportunities, or energizing the team through effort plays. Over time, these contributions can accumulate and influence outcomes, even if they don't always dominate the headlines. At the same time, consistency remains the ultimate benchmark. The difference between potential and production is the ability to deliver similar levels of performance across multiple games. For Reese, building that consistency will likely be one of the main goals moving forward. As the season progresses, patterns will begin to emerge, shooting percentages will stabilize, roles will become clearer, and team identity will take shape. That's when more meaningful evaluations can be made, based not on isolated performances, but on sustained trends. It's also important to recognize that development in professional sports is rarely linear. Players often experience fluctuations, strong games followed by quieter ones, periods of adjustment followed by breakthroughs. These shifts are part of the process, particularly for those still early in their careers. From a long-term perspective, the focus should be on progression rather than perfection. Improvements in efficiency, decision-making, and defensive awareness can gradually elevate a player's overall impact. For Reese, the foundation, rebounding, energy, and competitiveness is already in place. The next step is building on that foundation with refinement and adaptability. For Atlanta, the objective is to translate individual strengths into collective success. That requires alignment between players, coaching staff, and system. When that alignment is achieved, even early struggles can become stepping stones toward a more cohesive and effective team. In the end, the conversation surrounding Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream is still in its early stages. What has happened so far provides material for analysis, but not for final judgment. The coming games will offer a clearer picture, not just of individual performance, but of how the team evolves as a whole. The gap between expectation and reality is often where the most meaningful growth occurs. How Reese and the Dream respond to that gap will ultimately define their trajectory far more than any single game or moment. As the schedule becomes more demanding, another variable will come into play: endurance and adaptability over a longer stretch of games. Early matchups often allow players to rely on instinct and energy, but as scouting reports become more detailed, opponents begin to target specific tendencies. This is where adjustments become critical. For Angel Reese, that means opponents will likely continue to test her in two primary areas, finishing through contact and defensive positioning against skilled post players. How she responds to those repeated challenges will shape the next phase of her development. Great players are not defined by avoiding weaknesses, but by addressing them over time. Film study will be a major component of that process. Breaking down missed opportunities, whether it's a rushed layup, a mistimed jump, or a defensive lapse, provides the kind of insight that practice alone cannot replicate. At the professional level, even minor corrections can lead to noticeable improvements in performance. There's also an element of pacing that becomes more important as players gain experience. Knowing when to slow down, when to reset a possession, and when to attack decisively can make the difference between an efficient offense and a rushed one. These decisions often happen in fractions of a second, and they improve with repetition and awareness. From a team perspective, Atlanta's ability to create structure will be key. When roles are clearly defined, players can focus on execution rather than uncertainty. This doesn't mean limiting flexibility. It means establishing a foundation that allows adjustments to happen within a consistent framework. Communication is another factor that tends to improve over time. Early in a season, miscommunications are common, especially on defense, where timing and coordination are essential. As players become more familiar with each other's tendencies, those gaps usually begin to close. The psychological side of the game cannot be overlooked either. External criticism, media narratives, and public expectations all contribute to the environment in which players perform. Managing that environment, staying focused on internal goals rather than external noise, is a skill in itself. For a player like Reese, whose visibility extends beyond the court, maintaining that focus can be particularly challenging. However, it also presents an opportunity to demonstrate resilience. Responding to criticism with improvement rather than reaction is often what separates players who sustain success from those who struggle under pressure. Another aspect worth considering is leadership development. Leadership doesn't always come from experience alone. It can also emerge through effort, accountability, and consistency. As Reese becomes more comfortable within the team, there may be opportunities for her to contribute in that capacity, even if it's not in a traditional vocal leadership role. Veteran teammates play a role in that process as well. Guidance, feedback, and shared experience can accelerate adaptation, helping newer players navigate both on-court challenges and off-court expectations. This collaborative dynamic is often what strengthens a team over the course of a season. From a strategic standpoint, Atlanta may explore ways to better utilize Reese's strengths. This could include more structured opportunities for offensive rebounding, positioning her in actions that create favorable matchups, or incorporating sets that allow her to operate with clearer spacing. Adjustments like these can enhance efficiency without requiring a complete overhaul of playing style. At the same time, development is a two-way process. While teams adjust systems to fit players, players also expand their skill sets to fit systems. Finding that balance is essential for long-term success. As more games are played, statistical trends will begin to carry more weight. Early fluctuations will smooth out, providing a more accurate reflection of performance. This is when discussions about impact, efficiency, and role become more grounded in data rather than isolated observations. It's also when narratives tend to shift. Early criticism can give way to recognition of improvement, just as early praise can be tempered by consistency issues. In that sense, the story is always evolving, shaped by what happens over time rather than in a single moment. For the Atlanta Dream, the objective is not just short-term improvement but long-term cohesion. Building a team identity, whether it's defensive intensity, fast-paced offense, or balanced scoring, requires repetition and commitment. Once that identity is established, individual performances often become more consistent within that structure. Reese's role within that identity is still forming. Whether she becomes a primary interior presence, a high-energy rebounder, or a more versatile contributor will depend on both her development and the team's strategic direction. The potential for multiple pathways exists, which makes this stage particularly important. The broader lesson here is one of patience. In professional sports, especially in a league as competitive as the WNBA, progress rarely happens instantly. Players grow, teams adjust, and systems evolve. Early challenges are not necessarily indicators of long-term outcomes, they are part of the process that leads to them. For observers, the key is to distinguish between moments and trends. A single game can highlight areas of concern, but only a series of games can confirm whether those concerns are persistent. Similarly, flashes of strong performance become meaningful when they are repeated consistently. As the season unfolds, the focus will gradually shift from what went wrong in early games to what is improving over time. That shift is where the most valuable insights emerge, not just about individual players, but about how teams adapt and develop. In the case of Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream, the next stretch of games will provide that clarity. Adjustments will be tested, roles will solidify, and performance will be measured against a growing body of work. Until then, the most accurate conclusion is also the simplest. The story is still being written. As the season moves deeper, another important factor begins to take shape: accountability. Not just individual accountability, but collective accountability across the roster. Teams that improve are usually the ones where players recognize their roles clearly and take ownership of both their strengths and their shortcomings. For Angel Reese, accountability may show up in subtle but meaningful ways: shot selection, defensive discipline, and awareness of spacing. These are not always the most visible elements of performance, but they are often the most impactful over time. A well-timed pass instead of a forced attempt, a properly executed defensive rotation instead of a late contest. These are the kinds of adjustments that gradually shift efficiency. At the same time, coaching decisions will continue to evolve. Rotations that seem uncertain early on often stabilize as patterns emerge. Certain lineups may prove more effective in specific situations, and others may be phased out. This process is not necessarily a reflection of failure, it's a standard part of refining a team's identity. For Atlanta, one of the key questions will be how to balance pace and control. A faster tempo can create opportunities, but it can also lead to rushed possessions if not managed carefully. Slowing the game down at the right moments, especially when momentum shifts, can help maintain composure and improve shot quality. Reese's role within that balance could become increasingly important. As a player who operates near the basket, she is often involved in plays that require physical positioning and timing. Improving efficiency in those moments, whether through better footwork or quicker decision-making, can have a ripple effect on the team's overall offensive performance. Defensively, consistency tends to separate average teams from strong ones. It's not just about making highlight plays, but about sustaining effort across every possession. Staying engaged, communicating effectively, and minimizing fouls are all part of building a reliable defensive presence. Facing a variety of opponents throughout the season will also accelerate learning. Different teams present different challenges. Some rely on perimeter shooting, others on interior scoring, and some on pace and transition. Adapting to those styles requires flexibility and preparation. For a young player, these experiences are invaluable. Each matchup offers a chance to refine skills, test adjustments, and build confidence. Over time, those individual lessons contribute to a more complete and adaptable game. Another dimension to consider is how expectations evolve. Early in the season, expectations are often shaped by projections and narratives. As games are played, those expectations begin to align more closely with reality. Players who adapt effectively can shift those expectations in their favor. For Reese, that means the opportunity to redefine the conversation through performance. Improvement does not need to be dramatic to be meaningful. Incremental gains, higher shooting percentages, fewer defensive breakdowns, better decision-making can collectively change how her impact is perceived. Team chemistry will also continue to develop. Trust between teammates is built through repetition, knowing where someone will be on the court, understanding their tendencies, and anticipating their decisions. As that trust grows, execution typically becomes smoother. Leadership, too, can take on different forms as the season progresses. Some players lead through communication, others through consistency and effort. Identifying and embracing those roles can strengthen the overall structure of the team. From a broader perspective, it's important to remember that development is not always visible in highlight reels or box scores. Some of the most important progress happens in practice, in film sessions, and in the quieter moments of preparation. These are the areas where habits are formed and refined. For Atlanta, the long-term objective is to translate those internal improvements into on-court results. Wins and losses remain the ultimate measure, but the path to those outcomes is shaped by daily progress and collective alignment. As more data becomes available, analysts and observers will have a clearer basis for evaluation. Trends in efficiency, defensive rating, and lineup effectiveness will provide deeper insight into how the team is functioning. These metrics, combined with visual analysis, offer a more complete picture than early impressions alone. It's also worth noting that the league itself is evolving. The level of competition continues to rise, with younger players entering the league more prepared and versatile. This raises the standard for everyone, making adaptation not just beneficial but necessary. Within that environment, players who commit to continuous improvement tend to find their footing. Whether through skill development, conditioning, or strategic understanding, growth becomes the defining factor. For Reese, the foundation is already established. Rebounding, energy, and presence are qualities that translate at any level. The challenge and the opportunity is to build on that foundation in ways that align with the demands of the professional game. For Atlanta, the process is about cohesion. Bringing together different skill sets, personalities, and roles into a unified system takes time. Early inconsistencies are part of that process, not necessarily a sign of its failure. As the narrative continues to evolve, it's likely that both individual and team performances will fluctuate. Strong games will be followed by quieter ones, and adjustments will lead to new challenges. This cycle is a natural part of competitive sports. The key is how those cycles are managed. Teams that remain focused on long-term development rather than short-term reactions tend to achieve more sustainable success. Players who approach challenges as opportunities for growth rather than setbacks often show the most improvement. In the end, the story surrounding Angel Reese and the Atlanta Dream is not defined by a single performance, a single game, or even a single stretch of games. It's defined by progression, how the team evolves, how roles become clearer, and how individuals adapt to the demands of the league. What began as a highly anticipated debut has now transitioned into a broader evaluation of fit, development, and potential. That evaluation will continue to unfold over the course of the season, shaped by performance, adjustment, and resilience.